this is another video, and this one is about Golang and one use case that I had while working on my side project. And use case is this, like if you know Golang, like it's a statically typed language, and while we working with databases, most of the time you need to know what kind of columns you are getting. Like if you're getting a single row or multiple rows, and in any case, against each row, you need to know number of columns, their order, and their data type. So you can scan them or capture them. So on my screen, you can see I'm running a simple web server, localhost colon 3000, and what it does when I refresh it or hit this endpoint. Once I hit this endpoint, I get three records from database, and all these three records like actual number of rows, like total number of rows. Basically, I have a fresh database that doesn't contain anything. It only has one database table called warriors, yeah. And inside the table I have only three rows. So a database I'm running is Postgres SQL, yeah, inside a Docker container. And then what I'm doing, I'm running Golang Fiber framework. It's a Express is like framework. Like if you work with Node.js or Express.js, actually, then this syntax of this functional syntax maybe is like familiar. So although I will start with the dynamic thing because what I wanted to do in my side project, I wanted to build something like a query builder, yeah, or SQL query explorer or window, whatever you call it. Let me show you what I mean by that. So something like this. This is an area where you can type anything, any valid SQL query, and once you run it, you will get the results. So if I'm only like asking about three columns, I will get those three columns. If I'm running, give me all the columns, it will give me all the columns. Now I can make a one-line query or I can make a 100-line SQL query. Yeah, maybe that query is doing multiple joins with other tables if I have other tables, or if it or basically it's generating a new column dynamically, although that column is not present inside your database table. Example would be you are joining first name and last name. You are like concatenating these two columns and generating a full name column basically. So whatever you can think of that, as long as it's valid, based on that query, you will have a dynamic result, either two column, three column, one row, or multiple rows. So I wanted to build something like this. And with Golang, the problem was, again, as I said, you need to know the number of columns. But if you are generating a dynamic query, then you would not know the columns in advance, their order, and their number. So how you do this? This is a method. Actually, this is the method that actually I take from this reference here. The discussion was going on this forum, golangbridge.org. Yeah, and if you scan through uh, these comments, you would see like they are trying to do exactly what I wanted to do. And here we will go down a bit. This query to JSON function where they are looping through. So I just copy this code. The problem was what I wanted to do. I wanted to also, while I have the result, I do not care like if my results are like actually like you can see number and this boolean, although in database it was like it's set like number, and this true false thing is actually a boolean column. But while I'm getting this thing inside Golang server, I'm translating them into a string, and then I'm when I'm serializing this thing into JSON, I'm just keeping that string format. So I do not care if number gets number one or two. gets a string number, yeah, because string numbers are like this in JavaScript, like inverted comma. So it's basically a string, and the value of this string is one. So if you try to add something to it, it will just do the concat effect, not the addition or subtraction, because it's eventually a string. But for human, they can see, okay, ID is one and two and so on. So this was like solving my use case, and code was simpler if I keep the string format. So that's what I want to do. Let me just quickly slide through the function. So this objects, this is a key value pair, yeah. It's the array of key value pairs or array of a map, basically. If you notice what JSON is actually key value pair, key value, key value, key value. So there is one object, this JSON object is a collection of key values, yeah. And then there is a second object doing same. So we are having an array of, these collections or key value pairs objects. So in this can be translated into Golang as a map, basically, because map let you have a key and a value. And if you just put an array behind it, that means you exactly have this kind of response where you have multiple objects inside an array, multiple JSON objects, basically, yeah. So that's why I have this objects array. What I'm doing, uh, I'm having key as a string and interface is a type for my value. Like it could be integer, it could be a string. So you can have like something like maybe a map. That map has a string type, and also value would be a string, or value would be an integer, or it could be an interface just like above. So uh, this interface means like this is the base type in Golang. Every type is kind of substitutable into this thing. So if I have var a is equal to interface, yeah, then a can be like one, basically. Then sorry, I can just log println a, so it doesn't cry. So you can see it's compiled, it's working. So interface is kind of base type, basically. So then the rest of the code is kind of like some parts are simpler because they are like Golang convention. If you're working with Golang, you might see it like 1,000 times or million times. I don't know. What I'm doing here, I have a DB coming, open DB connection into this function. And on that DB connection, I have a query method, so I can supply my query, and my query is right now maybe set static from, warrior table. So just let me quickly check. Yeah, so you see I'm calling here for the slash endpoint or root endpoint. I'm calling query.json method or function, basically passing it my database connection that I'm setting up here. You can see my Docker container. This is my database running inside Docker container here. So I have that DB connection. I'm passing this, and also I'm passing my simple query. And if I go back to my function here, I run my query using this query method. It gives me either an error or the rows object. This rows is like multiple rows coming from database. So if we have an error, just return this error, and whoever called this function will handle that error. And in my case, I'm running that, returning that error to browser, basically to whoever called my API. Yeah, so they will see that error. But if we don't have an error, like we got some rows, then we can loop on them. And this now this is the part where that is like a little bit different. Normally in Golang, here you can just like if you know like your select static from warriors will only always return 4 columns, and ID would be first name would be second, last name would be third column. So you initialize those variables here with their data types, and you use the scan method. But we would not do that here because we are trying to run a construct a dynamic query, run it on database. We know we will get dynamic result set. So now once we have a row inside this loop, like we are iterating over rows. And inside this loop, we will have a reference to a single row, basically the first row inside that rows collection. Let's call it that. And then we can say like, okay, give me the columns, all the columns inside that rows, inside that row. And either it will fail with some error. We will just return same thing, like this is just copy paste code, error handling. Otherwise, we will have columns. Now, we might have two columns, we might have three columns. So what we are doing, we need to now construct uh, an array, and that's why we are using this length function. Like make an array of any value type. Just consider this interface and most basic, most generic data type available inside Golang. So as I showed you earlier, you can supply any value, any number, any string, boolean, regardless. If in your function, if in your code you have this kind of type for your variables, yeah. So we are saying make an array of interface type. That means any type can be like stored inside that array, and the array length would be the number of columns we are getting from here. So if our row contains three columns, then we will have an array of three, basically. The array length would be three. So now an empty array got initialized. Then we are making a map, and then uh, we are initializing an empty map basically, where key would be a string data type and value would be any type. So I'm using any word because in Golang, if you check out some code definition that is coming from Golang core library, you might see they use this data type any, and that any is actually equal to that is actually the type alias for this thing, interface curly brackets, basically. So then once you have this thing, what you are doing, you loop over the columns, you will get you are ranging over the columns basically, and it will give you a column value and also this thing index basically. So inside that column that is coming from your database package basically, because Golang provide you a basic package for database handling, and this type is defined there. So if I show you data type, it's actually basically SQL package is handling this thing, and inside SQL you have this column type data type. And once you have that variable of that type, what you can do, you can call a method on it. And if we call the dot name method, we will get the name of that column. So you can see I have these are the names of my columns: ID, category, first name, first underscore last name, and last underscore name, and things like that. Yeah. So name will hold this thing, and we are using that name as a key. And then this new will give you a pointer basically to anything that you pass inside this new function. It will give you a reference, memory reference, or pointer to it. And now we are using static string or a string pointer inside it. So we kind of have double pointer, you know, return from this statement or this expression, and the result of that double pointer is stored inside this object variable, basically on the object that has the key. So ID column inside this object map will have reference of this double pointer, yeah. And same thing, that double pointer we are then again using here because we are just reusing this object dot column name here again. So that means it was reference to this thing. So this thing is coming here, and we are setting it to our values array basically. So why we are doing all this circus? Because this scan method is the key in Golang database package. Uh, so rows.scan, what it will do, it takes uh, pointers basically, yeah, or memory references of the variables, and then is try to put values inside them. Yeah, since it's using pointers or memory references. So once its execution is done, once it's successfully run, those variables that were uh, like those variables which references with references inside that function, yeah, whose references you passed here, they will have updated values. So what a scan does, like it will take the memory pointers or memory references like memory pointers. It will take what a scan does. It takes pointers or memory references of variables, yeah, and then it initializes them with the values coming from database. So here these values, these two lines essentially is building an array of memory references, yeah, against the number of columns. So if we have three columns, we know like our values array uh, would have length of three, and each index will hold a variable or memory, reference or pointer to it. So we can just this three dots means expand that values array. So these three, the length was three, so it will pass three variables here. Like it will expand as three items, yeah. So those three items, like let's say variable one, comma variable two, comma variable three, they will pass to this scan method. And since their type was actually the pointer, yeah, and under the underlying type of that pointer was string because we are using that string thing here. So it will try to initialize those variables with the values coming from database. So if this scan method runs correctly, if there are no errors inside scan, what you can do, it will like your pointer, the pointers you passed inside that scan method will now hold actual values from database. So if you see those pointer references were stored inside this object map, and that object map, map is key value thing, and objects was also an array of key values thing. So we can just append object into objects, yeah. And what it essentially does, we can then pass those objects because this all running inside this for rows dot next loop, like we are traversing all the rows. So once this loop is done, we have an objects array that first it was empty here, yeah, it was just defined, not initialized even, and now it has uh, all the is it should have, because we have three rows inside database until now. The objects will have three rows, I mean three items inside it. And then we are passing it to JSON.Marshall intent, and this is the Golang package for you to have a JSON representation or yeah, actually a string of JSON representation of your objects. So I'm passing an array, actually a map, yeah, array map, and that will be translated into something like base64 that is not humanly readable. But what I'm also doing, just to show you, once I have results here, let me go back. Yeah. So once I pass the query, I pass the database connection, I will either have error or results. If we have error, we are sending error to our API, yeah, to our client basically. And if we don't have an error, this result will hold that JSON encoded string, yeah. So if I copy this, paste it, just for you to see it, let's call it in a browser. You see nothing change in browser, but here if I come here, you see I get this thing. Result is equal to a byte array. It contains all this hexadecimal value, I believe, or something. I cannot read it, and if you read it, then you are maybe a 10x programmer or super programmer or something like that. Yeah, But for me, if I want to log this thing in logs, so I can later look what happened and inspect if I like to inspect something. Yeah. What I would do is, but that was not fine. So I will just put string, use this string function and pass that result into string, and then it will like encode that thing into human readable string. We hit it again. Now you can see, you can almost read this thing. Because it has this tabs and new line characters or instructions basically. But you can see categories, ninja, dated on timestamp and everything. So this was it. That's how you do it, the dynamic thing. Few catches that I wanted to uh, showcase here. If we go back to this thing, this string, as I mentioned before, I am converting every value to a string. Yeah, and you can see it in results here. Category, date, timestamp, everything is string. Numbers is converted to string, boolean converted to string. Only you will either have strings or null values. And these null value exist because in my database, um, I have two records where last name is null. Basically, you can see null. So this got translated into null. Otherwise, everything is like this. Um, string basically. And this is done by using this string thing, like a double pointer to this string, or actually a pointer to a string pointer. So pointer to a string pointer. Yeah, this does this kind of magic. But if you don't want this thing, and if you want like if your use case is like this, that I want to translate at least three values or three data types, uh, or preserve three data types basically, while I'm making a JSON result, or while I'm constructing a JSON response. For example, if ID or is a number, I know in database it's a number. So instead of passing this thing as a string, I want a number here. Same goes with Boolean. So what you can do, like this, uh, what you can do, you can once you have this v variable that is containing the interface actually, or base type basically, yeah. But that base type essentially contains underlying data type coming from your database, yeah. So what you need to do now, you need to match basically. That is done by using Golang type assertion method. So this is type assertion where you are saying v dot type. I'm interested to know the type and match it with the cases like that follows. Yeah. So I'm check not I now we are checking here if type is unsigned integer 8. Uh, we an array of unsigned integer 8 and array pointer basically. So this is like array pointer to an array of unsigned integer 8. And if that case matches, convert into a string. So for example, if the type was boolean here, we can say case boolean or bool, whatever is there. If that's the case, convert it to a string, or instead of string, use new, and then instead of string, we can type bool here. So we are taking a pointer to bool. Yeah. And if you then essentially you are matching your cases, and inside this new function you will pass your actual data type that you want to have. Maybe it's string, maybe it's bool, whatever you want to have it. If we go some other case, you can see here they are using case text and then again converting it to string, and otherwise they are defaulting into this generic interface data type. There was one function that was showing a lot of, yeah, this one. So if you have integer 64 case, or float 64, or a boolean, then you can, translate like this. Uh, this approach, I'm showcasing the switch and case statement. Otherwise, this generic scanner is something a bit different, yeah, because you are on here you are making your own customized scanner basically that will handle how you want to translate database type into Golang type, and it will gives you your values based on your switch and cases, yeah. But idea remains simple. Use this one, and you will figure out based on this syntax what to do next, yeah. My case, I always wanted a string, so I bypass this thing and use something that a guy mentioned here. So I'm using this syntax basically, or this expression, just convert it into a string. No type assertion, no interface, nothing. So what it does, it handles your nulls, and because you can see like if I have null values, they are getting translated into null. Otherwise, everything is translated into string and it works. It's not crashing. I showed you. So this was it actually. For as far as we are talking about dynamic query results and how to parse them in Golang, maybe in Java and maybe in C Sharp, this thing is are much simpler because you have a collection or enumerable basically coming to you, and then you are just putting whatever list you have dot something each or for each, and you just keep going. Yeah, uh, it was like a magic box for you. Golang is kind of a little bit manual in that regard, and you have to dive deeper. You have to debug a lot uh, to see like what are the underlying types, what kind of values your variables are holding, and then you have to play around to make things work. It has its, pros and cons. I will not dive into them, but yeah, that's the thing. My code doesn't involve like two or three function that I was showing you as an endpoint, like simple endpoint and then error endpoint. I will just quickly glance over them because if you you know uh, those are like much easier than the function I just show you. Yeah. So here one example is this. This is handling the null case. Let me first show you the result of it. So if we are using this simple endpoint, you can see the last names are like coming as an empty string instead of getting null. Yeah. And rest of and booleans are actually true and false. They are not boolean string, like they are not wrapped into double quotes. Yeah. So this is kind of preserving its type. And how we are doing this, we are having this query. We are always select these four columns. So we know the number, we know the order of it, first name, last name, and then third column is always teacher, fourth column is always is active, and we know their types inside database. So what we can do, what I actually did, I make a struct, and you see three columns, first name, last name, teacher are actually strings, and is active is boolean. So this is the normal way of Golang that you would see a lot, like in many samples or documentation pages. You have a query, you pass that query to your query method here, that SQL query here, or query string basically. You will get results. You loop through them, the rows. Yeah, you loop for each row, and for each row we are then constructing a new variable that hold a single record or hold all the columns for that single row. So, and this one on the top is the response, basically overall response. So it will hold all the rows. So it's kind of like global variables currently is empty, nothing. Yeah. So we hold an array, like we created an array. and it's right now empty. And this response variable or res variable is holding that empty warrior array. And then what we are doing here, we are trying to scan. We are using this, we are passing the references of first name from the warrior object here, this W here, this W here. So ampersand means memory address of first name, teacher, and is active. And then if a scan passes, we will I'm skipping this L name for a purpose, yeah. This one. Assume for now it's not there, but rest of the W first name, W dot teacher, W dot is active, they got scanned, they will have valid values. And once my scan is done, if I do not have any error, I'm just appending that single warrior into the overall response. That is the set of warriors basically, and that's it. Once my rows for loop is done, yeah, then I'm converting that response array that is essentially the warrior array. Yeah, I'm converting it into a JSON response. Uh, and then I will just serve that JSON response to my API client, whoever is calling my API basically, or passing it to browser. Now let's talk about this L name. So L name is short for last name, and if you can see, I know like two of my rows contain last name with values null. So last name is null for two rows inside my database. Yeah. So with the SQL package, I have this special data type that is called null string. I initialize lm to be of this type, and then I just pass a reference. And this is actually a struct. If I show you the definition, it's a struct with two fields, string and valid. And valid is true if the string is not null, otherwise it would be false. So once scan is done, I check if lm is valid, lm dot valid. So if it's valid, that means lm now have a value, it's not null. So since it has a value, I can access that value using dot string, and I now store it inside my warrior object last name instead of directly passing it here. So this is the trick if you are facing null values. My case right now for my whatever values I have inside my database table, I know like only last name will create a problem. But if I look at a schema, maybe all the columns will create problems where I say like they can be null, like, or where I skip not null basically. So essentially, if I want to like safeguard it more, maybe like if first name can be null, like or something like if I was using created on or updated on here, actually updated on here and updated on can be null. So I should use, I should have include another variable here or updated on something or you on SQL dot null string or whatever like I desire. Yeah. So basically, right now only I have last name, so I use lname, and that will do the trick. And you see, like it's using the string inside my response. And why if we don't use this null string kind of thing, yeah, then what you would see is like this implementation where we are just passing w dot last name instead of using equal dot null string, and this is the third endpoint that I name is at as error. So if you call this endpoint, let me call it once more. You see a scan throwing an error. You need to fix that error. Then you need to use that SQL null string that I show here. So this is how you. This is like basics of working with database, and this is how I managed to make my side project work. where I'm taking a dynamic query, getting the dynamic result set, and then able to pass that dynamic result set into either a null value, yeah, for each column, either a null or a string. And this is it. Let me lastly show you the README it contains. If you want to run this demo, I will post the GitHub link. Uh, README is there as well. This is how you will run Dockers to your container. Yeah, did I say this is how you run? This is how you run Postgres inside Docker container. And then this is the simple schema for my one table that I'm using. So my database only has one table. And then I'm just inserting 3 records inside that table. And then you can just query like select static or whatever you want to do with it. Already posted this demo here. So same README, yeah. And you can just download this thing, run go mod tidy or go mod install, and it will work basically. One other thing I'm running that you might find interesting. Sometime it create a little problem based on what's you're running inside. So you see, instead of running go run main.go like that I can do. So this is coming from Golang fiber framework that I just showed you. And if I'm running my program with go run command, every time I'm making a change, I need to stop this process and then run again. So my updated code, you know, get compiled and get into invocation, and my server is running with the latest code basically. If you are using this package, no, it's not here. This package air main.go, yeah. So what it does, it's watching your files. You save it. You do not need to terminate your process and relaunch it again. You just save your file and you go to your browser. If you are building an API, you hit your endpoint and changes would be there. So I do not need to go back to this window again and again, use Control C, then relaunch my program. So it saves a lot of time. So this is Air package. Thank you for watching this video. Hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye bye.